Okay, it is 2 o'clock and it is time to start with our session. So welcome to everybody who just joined in. The early birds and I were chatting, getting our housekeeping out of the way, which was really just to make sure you could see and hear me. So now I'm going to get started. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're dialing in from. I'm Andrea Hill. I'm CEO of the Hill Management Group and our Works brands. We serve the jewelry industry from mine to market, and I have experience with jewelry companies of every size, from micro businesses through large manufacturing corporations, and on almost every continent. The Jewelry Design Professional Network invited me to prepare this 2-session series for their membership and for the Fashion Institute of Technology. And then they graciously opened up these sessions for the rest of the industry. So I want to start by thanking JDPN for this generous contribution to the industry and for thinking about the need for this kind of information. For most of us, the last 2 weeks have been a crazy flurry of activity, anxiety, tactical actions as we try to figure out how to cope with the crisis. And the conditions keep changing, and I don't think the stress is out of the way yet. But today and next week, in 2 parts, we are going to take a very serious, almost academic look at the jewelry industry, at the situation that came before now, at how the coronavirus is actually accelerating and adding to the jewelry industry situation that we're dealing with, and how this global pandemic is going to accelerate those things and add some new things. So we have a lot of ground to cover. Okay, now I'm going to switch screens and give you guys the slides. You were supposed to see that while I thanked JDPN, so thanks again to JDPN. Can you guys see the slide? I just want to make sure you can see that before I continue down this path. Perfect. Okay, so let's begin. As I say that, the slide won't change. There we go. Okay, can you see the second slide? We're going to start with some historical context, because historical context informs present action. So I give you this picture because I want us all to think for a moment about this very real example we have. Just making sure that the slide changed. So you should be able to see a slide now with people wearing masks, historical context. Okay, good. So China's response to COVID-19 was very different than the rest of the world's response. Why was that? It's because their response to COVID-19 was informed by their experience with SARS. So they had a historical context and it informed their present action. Hey, Dana. Now, if we were really smart human beings, like we were created to be, if we drew on that, we would learn from other people's historical context. I don't know that we always do that. But if you have a historical context, and we're going to talk about historical context in the jewelry industry today, then you can make better decisions. The video industry is an example of an industry that sprung up and then fell apart within the last 30 years. It lacked historical context. Those of us who were in it were probably too young at the time to actually go looking for comparable historical context, even if it was hard to find. And so the rise and fall of the video industry was very swift. I want you to understand the recent historical context of the jewelry industry so that it will inform your next steps as business owners and entrepreneurs and designers. When I joined the jewelry industry in 1995, so it's been a little while, I experienced for the first time, because I'd always been in big business, I experienced for the first time working with micro businesses and independent designers and entrepreneurs. And even back then, it was starting to look like it was not sufficient to know how to make something and simply sell it to a distribution network. You have to have more business knowledge than ever before to compete. And as we go through today's presentation, you'll see why. I will try to keep this as interesting and alive for you as possible. And you have to promise me that you will try to stay awake through some of the parts that may not appeal to the way you like to think about business. So, and I say that because the next thing we're going to talk about is, what is a business model? So just like you need historical context to understand and envision your future actions, You also need business context to understand and envision future activities. If you do not have the proper business context, then, oh, I hate this analogy, but it's the only one I can think of. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, because you have to have the same kind of business knowledge that other businesses, larger businesses than you have, so you can make better decisions in the current context. So what's a business model? Well, it's a simple thing, really. It's a design for the successful operation of a business. The business model identifies what the revenue resources will be, what the customer base will be, and all the details of its financing. So the business world is constructed around business models. And the jewelry industry traditionally relied on 5 business models: independent retail, chain and mall retail, manufacturers, distributors, and brands. Interestingly enough, I tend to include designers in that brand concept, because even though you're not advertising for global awareness, you have an identity that's more similar than a brand than to a manufacturer. So let's say we had big brands and tiny brands. Also, interestingly, the jewelry industry's consumers are less conscious of jewelry brands than they are of brands in the fashion world and in the other consumer goods worlds. So brands are just kind of an interesting concept for the jewelry industry anyway. So that, oops, sorry, I just moved that slide along. So these are the elements that have always existed in the jewelry industry's business models. And each model played a very specific role within that. So brands marketed and created consumer interest and drove consumers to stores. Big brands try to do that nationally, like a David Yurman. And even the designer brands have done that by creating their own mailing lists, their own trunk shows. So brands create consumer interest and drive them to stores. Manufacturers produced generic products that sort of filled in the product offering at lower prices, because when you're manufacturing en masse, you can generally do it for a lower price than when you are either paying for a brand's advertising model or paying for the really high-end, low volume production, in other words, one-by-one production of the designer or studio producer. Then retail stores' responsibility was to market locally and sell to their consumers. And if they were a chain, they marketed nationally, but they were driving consumers to their local locations. And then distributors carried the inventory burden and facilitated more diverse product mix for retailers. Now, by the 1990s, the jewelry distributors had largely disappeared. We really don't have much left in the way of jewelry distribution. Stoller would be an example where they do finished jewelry distribution, but they are the manufacturer, and that's mostly what they distribute, so it doesn't even quite fit. So we have distributors for tools and equipment and packaging, but we don't really have a distributor model for finished jewelry anymore. So those were the models that existed within the jewelry industry all the way up until quite recently, the last 20 or so years. And there were factors that reinforced those models. There were factors in place that caused those models to be sustainable. The first was that it was extremely expensive to start up a jewelry business. The second was that jewelry business required specialized and difficult to access knowledge. And the third is that the jewelry industry has always been quite closed to outsiders. So those factors reinforced the models. And then we had 5 major disruptions over 30 years. And 3 of those disruptions were in the last 20 years. Now, people tend to think of the internet as the main disruption of our industry before COVID-19, which is now about as disruptive as it ever has gotten. And even when they think about the internet being a disruptor, they only think of it in terms of price pressure and retail competition. But thinking that way leaves you blind to the changes that we've just been through. So we're going to take a look at these disruptions and their impact on our industry and the opportunities that each disruption presents, because every disruption comes with opportunity for people who are thinking about finding opportunity in difficult times. Now, you will have the slides from this presentation when we're done. I'd like you to hold on to them. And in the future, as you make decisions and ponder corrections and create opportunities for your business, I want you to stop and think about these disruptions because you will come up with better ideas and you'll make better decisions if you do. So what was the first disruption? Well, the first disruption was actually throughout the 1980s, and it was mass industrialization. So as the technology became available to push manufacturing all over the globe, every industry started moving its production to lower wage countries as an effort to reduce the labor cost of their production. And the jewelry industry did that too. So jewelry manufacturing moved to China and to other low labor cost countries, but mostly to China. As a result, people don't always think about this. We see it, but the result was that design became very generic. We had mass production. We had shared manufacturing facilities. So in China, one manufacturing facility was often producing for 6, 7, 8 major brands, particularly in the beginning. They were all relying on CAD, which if you think about it, back in the 1980s was much less capable than it is today. And knockoff culture was really introduced during those years. The smaller production operations became uncompetitive. So in the United States, we saw Rhode Island basically fold in on itself. New York jewelry production shrunk by about 85%. The industry overall became less agile, and it was the beginning of commoditization. This is a massive disruption in the jewelry industry that came well before the internet. So what were the impacts of that first disruption? Well, the first is that we now have a shortage of jewelers. I don't know that people realize how this mass, internationalization of production impacted our ability to produce new jewelers. But 20 years later, the training environment for jewelers has been dramatically diminished. The funding for trade schools to produce jewelers or any kind of production has been dramatically diminished. So we have less jewelers today, not enough jewelers really to meet the needs of consumers were we to market them properly. We have stagnation at retail. So this commoditization of jewelry and the homogenization of jewelry contributed to a real stagnation of design and style, and that has contributed to the downturn in retail jewelry. Everybody wants to blame the internet for the downturn in jewelry retail. The jewelry retail also got boring at the product level, and consumers responded by staying away. And it was the beginning of price resistance, because if your jewelry all starts to look the same and there's no personality behind it, then the only thing you can compete on is price. So we started having a race to the bottom in price. So those are the impacts of the first disruption. There were also opportunities related to the first disruption, and we're seeing them more and more today. The first is the opportunity for design. When consumers became bored with what was available at retail, they also became much more interested in designer jewelry, and that is a trend that's continuing to grow. There is a trend toward handmade and small batch production. There's a trend toward the promotion of artisanal work and high craft. And it's interesting because for a long time, for most of history, luxury was defined as something that wasn't available to everyone. And then suddenly in the 1980s, luxury became something that was accessible to everyone. So what defines luxury if everyone can have it? Well, the only thing we really have to replace that with is scarcity and personalization. So when we can sell patience as a virtue in a luxury goods world, if you have to wait for it because it's being made specially for you, then that is luxury. So those are opportunities that are actually coming out of that mass industrialization disruption. So there's our first disruption. In the 1990s, we had our second disruption. Look, we're not even at the internet yet. The second disruption was logistics technology. So packaging technology made it really easy for manufacturers to package in smaller quantities. So whereas 3M used to only sell buffs in packs of 100, it was finally affordable for them to sell buffs in packs of 3 and 10. Logistics technology also made it easier to pick, pack, and ship smaller quantities. So manufacturers no longer had to depend on companies like Rio Grande and Stoller to repackage and distribute their goods. ERP technology, so that's the computer technology that runs most mid-sized and large businesses and many small businesses. ERP technology started making it much easier to see the true costs of an organization. So big businesses were able to make decisions about reaching further and further into the supply chain, getting closer to the consumers all the time. And they could see the costs of that, so they knew when to stop. Before ERP technology, you just had to assume it was too expensive to do. After ERP technology, you knew where to draw the line. And transportation technology, FedEx, then UPS, well, UPS, then FedEx with air, then UPS with air, and then everybody else made it affordable to ship smaller parcels quickly. So that was our second disruption that really grew during the 1990s. So what was the impact of that disruption? Manufacturer direct. They were finally equipped to go direct. What were the opportunities related to that second disruption? Because there were opportunities for the rest of the industry. The first was that we can rethink manufacturing diversification. So it's not so. I remember when I first got to Rio Grande in 1995, and I found out we took 3 days to ship products, but Stoller could ship same day. And I realized Stoller had a FedEx depot right in their building, and I thought, how the heck can we compete with that? I'm down in Podunk, Albuquerque, and we have, the closest FedEx depot for us is miles and miles from our business, and FedEx had one in their business. Well, within a few short years, having the FedEx depot in your business wasn't really a competitive advantage anymore. So where you could ship from, all the different places you could ship from, became easier and easier throughout the 90s. There's another opportunity that is arising out of that logistics disruption, and that is additive manufacturing and what's happening in 3D metals, because the computerization that has transformed all of our operations is also going to be transforming the way we make things. And if any of you are involved in maker spaces, you already know how exciting this world is. I'm not going to dig into additive manufacturing at all today, but there is a webinar coming up from MJSA. We'll be doing it in the next, 4 weeks, I think, just on 3D metals and what's happening in 3D metals. Another opportunity related to this second disruption is that we can supply independent retailers with differentiated product if they'll see the opportunity. So everything became the same. Everything became sort of commoditized, and now consumers are getting bored. Now we have all these logistics that make it easy for anyone to ship anywhere. And that is the place for designers and studio producers to absolutely shine. But it can be challenging to get retailers to see this opportunity. There's also the opportunity to create product experiences for retail, which manufacturers can't do easily. Manufacturers can produce a lot of product for lower price points, but they can't necessarily deliver a differentiated product or an experience. And then finally, designers and small producers are more flexible, which makes it easier for them to contribute to what we call the 5 dimensions of retail experience. So what are those dimensions? Well, retail experience is human. So shoppers want to have quality interactions with knowledgeable and interesting people. And the human aspect is something that a designer and a studio producer or a small producer can bring. It's much more difficult for the manufacturers to do. And this is true both online and in store, whether you're collaborating with retailers or going direct. Shoppers want something that's meaningful. They want their sellers to make a difference in their lives, not just sell them a widget. And we know that when people buy something meaningful, they feel a lot more pride in that purchase, and that leads to commitment. So that's something that smaller producers can do. Personalization. Shoppers want to shop where and when they want, so online, social media, in store, and they expect their brands to understand their unique needs and make really meaningful recommendations. So retailers and small producers, separately or especially together, are much more likely to know the individual preferences and focus on true personalization of the experience. Now, really big powerhouses like Amazon and Walmart, sure, they can use technology and artificial intelligence to make recommendations, but it's never going to be as personal as what a direct small seller can do. So those were some opportunities related to the second disruption. Finally, we get to the internet, which is the third disruption. So, and it's not just the internet, it's the internet plus smartphones, because if smartphones hadn't come along the way they did, we would not be seeing nearly the impact we're seeing from the internet. So it removed the barrier to entry for retail. In the past, if you wanted to be in retail, you had to have enough money to buy or lease major retail space. You had a significant security requirement that does not exist if you just have a bodega that's, selling food products or less expensive consumer goods or inexpensive apparel retail. So the safe, the security, the insurance, all of the needs for a jewelry store have always been very high. Suddenly, those barriers to entry were removed because anyone could be a retailer. This disruption put a computer in everyone's hand. So now people are not only on the internet all the time, but they're carrying their internet experience with them, including into the store. So the online and the store experience have been merged. Those two things I think everybody's really aware of. But this next one, that it actually created the perception of endless choice for consumers, which is both a positive and a negative. The more choice people feel like they have, the more overwhelmed they tend to be. It changed the minimum standard necessary to compete in service standards as well. Consumers expect everyone to be equally fast, equally simple. And another commoditization step happened with the internet, which is it really pushed the commoditization of diamonds. As soon as everyone started selling diamonds in a spreadsheet online that anyone could look at, then that set the stage for Blue Nile to sell diamonds, and then diamond prices started being really pressured by competition. So that was the third disruption, internet plus smartphones. And what were the impacts? Well, the first impact is a lot of noise. People are really overwhelmed by the amount of choice that they have, even though they keep looking for that choice all the time. This disruption also let consumer tastes out of the bag. We were no longer constrained by, what the major department stores decided should be in the store windows, or for those who shopped on Fifth Avenue, what their retailers put in the store windows. Consumer taste became extremely global and individual at the same time. It changed consumer expectations of what their sellers would be delivering them. It did bring more price pressure and commoditization. Retail became a global thing. Suddenly, you could buy something from anywhere in the globe as long as they had the capability to ship it to you. And even if you couldn't buy something from anywhere on the globe, you could see what was selling everywhere in the globe. So that changed consumer expectations and taste and desire. And it separated the jewelry industry into two classes, those who had tech skills and those who didn't. Now, it separated all of business into two classes. But for the jewelry industry, we've really felt that. Interestingly, there are some opportunities that rise out of this that I'm not sure everyone recognizes are the opportunities of this disruption. The first is that we have this opportunity to make one-to-one relationships with our customers. So you can zero in on your people. I always tell people, or businesses, you don't have to have all the customers. You just have to have the right customers. And in fact, the internet makes it possible for you to find your people, either through SEO or through active targeting, ideally through a combination of the two, and then through collaboration with the retailers that are carrying your work. The other opportunity of this internet world is that there is more affordable software available than ever before. I did my first computer programming in the late 70s. And at the time, you had to have access to a computer lab with a massive mainframe and the security clearance to get in there. And you had to know how to, well, it was still like transitioning from punch card environment. That's how old I am. And even in the 80s and 90s, the technology to compete with big businesses was incredibly expensive. Today, a small business can compete with a big business very affordably. So that is another one of the opportunities that has come out of that disruption. So people think the opportunity of the internet is about computers, but it's not. The opportunity is about zeroing in on your people. That's really where the opportunity is. And then we had a fourth disruption. So we had the recession from, 2007, 2008, whenever people believe it actually started. That disruption reinforced all of the things I've just mentioned to you, and it really elevated quality of life issues. So this idea of responsible consumption, the idea of experiences over belongings, and an altered luxury landscape all got called into relief by that disruption. But otherwise, it sort of shone a lamp on all of the things I've already shared with you as both the effects of and opportunities of the previous disruptions. And now we're having a fifth disruption. So COVID-19 is a worldwide disruption. It's something that the world has not experienced since the Second World War in terms of worldwide impact of a singular event. It's going to both accelerate all of the things that I just talked about, and it's also going to introduce some new shifts. So labor cost arbitrage is just the technical term for making goods in a cheaper labor country. It had already become less important before COVID-19. And a lot of the jewelry industry has been hit by the tariffs that were our tariff war with China that started in 2019. So that had already started. Then COVID-19 actually pushed that forward. By the time COVID-19 started, a mere 2.5 months ago, 18% of goods from trade, from low wage to high wage countries. Let me say that differently because I just realized I said that very confusingly. Already, we were down to 18% of goods coming from low-wage countries. So in Europe, in America, in India, in China, people are consuming goods that were made in their own countries. As we created stronger consuming classes across the globe, they started consuming their own work. So we were already on a trend to stop sending goods from low-wage to high-wage countries. And now COVID-19 is going to make that even a bigger trend line. And trade was becoming concentrated within regions. So we were already seeing more intra-Europe trade. There's a huge initiative in Africa to initiate more intra-Africa trade. In the Americas, we see more intra-America trade. So we were already seeing manufacturing get more concentrated in regions. So those were trends that were already starting. But now some new things are happening. Remote working is going to go mainstream. Remote working has been available to people doing technology and intellectual work in the gig economy, but now everybody knows they can do remote working if they have the technology in place. We are going to see some significant decoupling from dependence on China. Too many companies have seen how damaging that is. It doesn't mean we're going to stop manufacturing in China, but we're going to reduce that dependence. We're going to see more manufacturing diversification. There is only one major American jewelry manufacturer that I know of, and I know most of them, that is fully manufacturing right now. And that's because they properly diversified. Everyone else has stopped. So we're going to see much more manufacturing diversification after this because nobody wants to be in this position again. And the dependence on digital commerce is going to skyrocket because people who we were already seeing really good penetration of digital commerce in the United States, less so in other countries. China digital commerce was very, very high, but countries like Italy, it still hadn't taken on the same kind of dominance that it does here. Now across the board, everyone is using digital tools to shop, and that is a behavior that's going to stick. Now, this decoupling from dependence on China may not seem like it matters to you if you are a designer or a studio producer, but it does. And here's why. It could result in greater competition for designers and studio producers if manufacturers do more localization, not only of their manufacturing, but of their design thinking. They won't necessarily do it, but they could. So I want you to be aware that some of these big trends could even affect very small producers. So that's our fifth disruption. So what are the impacts related to COVID-19? Well, first of all, work is changing. The way we work, how we collaborate together, who has to be at the office, who doesn't. It's already changing and it's going to continue to change. Supply chain transparency and responsiveness is going to change. People want to know where their goods are, where they're coming from and when they're coming in a way that they have never wanted to know before. I spent my whole week last week just fielding questions about who's still shipping and how can I get such and such. So nobody wants to be in this position before. They want more transparency in the supply chain. Now, we were already working on more transparency in the supply chain in terms of ethical and responsible business. And now, on a practical logistics level, it's also becoming very important. So that's going to push transparency issues much faster than, for those of us who really want a lot of transparency in our supply chain, push it a lot faster than we had even hoped was possible. Just-in-time inventory is going to be reconsidered and reviewed, because just-in-time inventory is a great way to keep your inventory low until you can't get any more inventory in. Now, in the jewelry industry, I don't see a huge impact yet because our retailers are over-inventoried already. They actually have enough to sell. So their concern right now is being able to ship. Customer service is going to change. All of a sudden, I live in this tiny town. I'm not even in town. I'm out in the country between two tiny towns in Wisconsin. And last night we found out we could get grocery delivery. We can't even get food delivery out here. The closest Starbucks is 20 miles away. But suddenly everyone is offering delivery and curbside. And that is going to change not only consumer expectations, but consumer behaviors. Yeah, both of those. And then finally, it's going to cause companies to do a lot of financial stress testing and systems upgrades and alignment. So they're going to be updating their infrastructure. And I want to really focus on these two because the first 4 bullets on this slide are pretty self-evident. So first of all, you have to think about how these things are going to affect you in relationship to your upstream and downstream supply chain. Where do you get your gold from? Where do you get your gems from, and where do they go next? All of these bullets relate to, that's the question you have to ask for yourself. So I believe that there's going to be an extended period of recovery. I don't think this is something we're snapping out of. We're certainly not snapping out of it in April, and we're certainly not going to be out of it by the end of May. So why do I say that? Well, I run a company in northern Italy, and we have branches in China and Hong Kong, 7 other countries, and then headquarters in Italy. So I've been looking at this situation since early January. And China has done a different approach to containing the situation than we have. But even today, so more, almost 12 weeks in for China, everybody's saying China's back, China's back. China is producing again, but in a very, very careful way, informed by their history. So they know that if everybody takes off their masks and goes back to work as if it never happened, the whole thing's going to start over again. In Italy, the word that we're getting from the government already today is that it's going to be a very slow reopening, and there are going to be a lot of safeguards put in place to make sure, again, that the situation doesn't flare out of control. And we haven't even seen the ramp up to the peak in the United States yet. So I'm advising all my clients to think about this as an extended period of recovery with an extended period of reinvestment. So financial stress testing is about companies recognizing that they can't depend on another bailout like the one we think we're getting now and don't even have any details on. Again, that if whatever happens right now, and it's still all very much in the air, nobody feels confident that it's going to help them weather the storm, or nobody knows what the details are. So companies that put some amount of money in savings so that they had a 3-month buffer, and there are companies like that, believe it or not, that have the ability to weather this storm, they are the ones that are going to be healthy at the end of this. And everybody else needs to be thinking, how can I put 3 months worth of business savings in the bank in case something like this happens again? Remember, we've had 5 major disruptions in the last 30 years. Now, none of them were to the extent of COVID-19, but the recession of 2007 to 2010 was pretty frightening for most businesses, and a lot of businesses closed. So that's 2 major business disruptions in 13 years. So businesses need to put enough money aside so that they can have buffer against financial stresses. And then systems upgrades and alignment. So in order to achieve greater transparency with our supply chains, in order to achieve work at home strategies, in order to manufacture in multiple different locations so that we have manufacturing diversification, for retailers, in order to handle all of these changing consumer expectations, they're going to have to invest in their computer systems and their business infrastructure. And that is money that they will not be spending on inventory. And they already weren't spending money on inventory. So these are implications of COVID-19 that you need to be thinking about as you make decisions for your business. Now, in next week's session, we're going to talk more in detail about the tactical things you can do. So if you're getting frustrated at this point going, oh my God, all these problems and she's not giving me any answers, I truly want you to understand the context so that next week we can talk about solutions and get more tactical, and you'll have this framework behind you. So there are also some hidden trends. So it's not a hidden trend to you. This hidden trend of micro producers, to many of the people in today's audience, you are that hidden trend. You are not surprised by this. But to many retailers and manufacturers, this is a surprising detail. We also have thousands of independent online retailers now. So we've always talked in the jewelry industry, when I first got here in '95, we were talking about 29,000 doors. And today we talk about around 19,500 doors. Well, the truth is we probably have closer to 40,000 doors because of all the people that are independently retailing their own jewelry. That's a lot of doors. We have a growing segment of appointment only and non-stocking jewelry sellers. And our services trade as a country is growing 60% faster than our goods trade. That's across all industries. That means consumers are much more interested in services than they've ever been before. So these are some other trends that have been going on and will continue to grow, probably accelerated by the experience of COVID-19. So how do we respond? So we're going to talk about some big themes now, and then we'll go into details next week. So the first is that we have to invest in our businesses. So, and for those of you who have tiny little businesses and you're thinking, all I want to do is produce jewelry and sell it, then you have to be aware that the people you're selling the jewelry to, if you're trying to get to retail, have to invest in their businesses. And once again, I can't stress this enough, don't be over optimistic about demand recovery. This is not going to just pop back and we're going to be whole in June and July. I think that's magical thinking, and we're tempted to do magical thinking, particularly if we are already struggling with capital or liquidity, or for companies that are veering toward bankruptcy, and we already had a lot of that in the jewelry industry. We're tempted to do magical thinking when we're already in trouble. So troubled organizations are more likely to believe in a faster recovery or a shallower downturn, and I believe this is going to be a deeper downturn. McKinsey and Company, their assessments, which I rely on for market assessments, they think the same thing, that it's going to be a deeper downturn. Now, if we face up to that possibility, then we can be better prepared for the uncertain future. If we give in to magical thinking, then we may not make the best choices. So companies are going to be investing in their business, technical, and financial capabilities. As we go through this, like many companies right now are already saying, now's the time to invest in my business. Retailers are working on websites. Manufacturers are working on their systems. Everybody's investing on their business as opposed to just doing the activities of their business. That is a good thing, but that's going to also continue after we start seeing an uptick in sales. So I think that's going to affect small producers who are trying to sell to retail. The next result of all of this, or the next thing to think about when you think about all of these disruptions and the state of the industry today, is that you are competing with everybody. You're competing with businesses 1,000 times your size. You're competing with businesses across the globe from you. You're competing with businesses that might be in the next apartment and you don't even know they're there. So what does that mean? Well, for retailers, they need an up-to-date POS, which is a point of sale system. Everybody needs up-to-date CRM, customer relationship management, and it is affordable even for the tiniest company. You also need good production management control. You need to understand what every piece you make costs you, including your labor, because you're counting how much time you put into it. So these are things that you need to be competitive. Everyone has to have an e-commerce site that is SEO capable. And by SEO, I don't mean the guy that sends you the email saying, I looked at your website and I can improve your SEO for you. I mean organic SEO, something that's within your control. And you have to have a high performance website that can deliver experiences and entertainment as well as a shopping cart. You need to have a much more effective online marketing strategy. Again, this is within your grasp because the tools to do this are not very expensive anymore. However, the time you need to do all those things, that is a big challenge. And so we'll talk in the next session about how you're going to make some time for these things. Omnichannel is very, very important. Consumers want to know that whether they find something online or in the store, on a website, social media, wherever they found it, they want that experience to be tied up in a bow for them. And I believe this means that as small producers, designers, studio producers, small brands, to develop your business, I think more collaboration with retail will be very important. But that means you have to have a retail sector that's also interested in looking at creative ways to collaborate so that you're both reaching out to these customers and both benefiting. So I see omnichannel not just as a retailer's ability to reach out to all of their customers through multiple channels, but also to incorporate their designer, artisanal, high craft, exciting producers and pull them into that omnichannel experience. And the people who figure out how to do that well are going to be very successful. But then flipping to the complete opposite side of the spectrum, everyone needs to use Amazon as their service model because consumers expect everyone to be able to do what Amazon does. That means you can't wait for 2 days to ship something unless you're making something custom. If you're making something custom, remember we're marketing patience as a virtue. But if you're selling something straight off your website, you need to be able to put it in a box and ship it as fast as Amazon with the same level of communication as Amazon. So they don't care that you don't have the same amount of money as Amazon. They know Amazon can deliver this experience, so why can't you? So you're competing with everybody, and that means you're going to need to master these 5 things at a level relative to your business. But they're all affordable and doable. That's the piece I'll tell you right now. Now, a lot of you are asking, should I sell to retail? Should I sell direct? Can I do both? Well, there's a lot of ways to go about this. If you already have enough retail stores to support your line and the amount of income you want to make, then you can sell just to retail because it does give you exponential access to consumers. It's hard to find consumers. Prospecting is expensive and time consuming. So selling to retailers is a great model if you can get enough exposure to achieve your financial goals. You can also sell direct, but it is not free. I think everyone has figured out by now that just building a website doesn't mean that you get website traffic. You have to build the website, but then you have to do a lot of things to bring traffic to that website. And again, a bigger discussion. Selling direct is definitely an option, but it's expensive. Or you can do both, and you can do both, but you have to do it with caveats. So if you have 10 stores and you're going direct, you need to make sure you protect those stores that are good to you, that order enough inventory and pay their bills on time by protecting their territory. Gone are the days when you could have an all or nothing model. If you only have one retail store and you're bowing to pressure that you only sell to retail and not online, you're not going to have a business. You're not going to survive. So you can do both, but you have to do it with caveats that create some market protection for your good retailers, and you can promise that market protection to new retailers who come in and buy. And buy is different than consignment. So you should consider doing some combination of both direct and retail. And we can talk more about what some of those details are. I think I've got a section in there for next week, or I can answer some questions. Now, how do you pull this off? Well, this is time to get really transparent. Tell the truth to retailers about the fact that, you have to make a living too, and we all have to get practical about how we're going to work together. The retailers need the differentiated product. The designers really do need the retailers. It helps you get more market space. And if everybody's being transparent and honest and practical, there are some great ways that everybody wins. And I do believe that there are business models where everybody wins if you just get transparent. Okay, now here's what we're telling retail. So this is important for designers and studio producers to understand because you can contribute to this understanding in meaningful ways. We are telling retailers, pure plays, internet pure plays sell products, but retailers sell experiences. So the competition that they have is that manufacturers are selling direct and designers are selling direct. So they need to understand that they're offering something different because just selling the product is not sufficient. Now, pure plays, internet pure plays can offer a range of goods, but they can't engage the five senses like a store can. The stores can offer these creative in-store adventures and omni-channel experiences and even tech-driven experiences in the store. So we're telling retailers, if you want to compete, recognize that you're selling experiences. We are also telling retailers that they have got to learn or relearn how to use the product as the form of entertainment. When I was at JCK last year, I was invited into this retail experience boutique where I was told that I could get a blowout or get my nails done. And I'm like, I don't want to get a blowout in some retail store. I'm going to go to my hairstylist if I need a blowout. I'm going to go to a manicurist if I need a manicure. The last thing I want to do is have a beauty experience in a retail jewelry store. If I want a glass of wine, I'm going to go visit a place with a great sommelier. I don't need somebody's, open for 5 days bottle of wine. That's not a retail experience at the jewelry store level. What consumers do want at retail is a break from the sea of sameness jewelry. They want a more meaningful experience at retail. They want transparency. They want to know where the jewelry came from and who handled it and were they treated, with respect and dignity in their work. So consumers want something that's more responsible and transparent. Consumers also know how many choices they have because they're on the internet all day long. So retailers need to curate. We're telling them they've got to curate their collections. They need to take risks with product. They need to get creative. They need to collaborate with the studio and designer jewelers because that's where the differentiation is. They've got to invest in custom, either in-house or with partners, and they need to offer responsible options. So this is the message that's going out to retail. Okay, this is the one where a lot of you who are designers are going to think, but I don't do math. But the truth is you do math. You do math every day. And what I'm going to talk to you on this slide is not outside your abilities. You need to learn to collect and use data. That first, transactional data, how much money people spent, how often they buy, when they buy, times of day they respond to things, what promotions they respond to, what pay methods they use. Those are all really important data points that can help you make better decisions about when you promote and what you promote and how you promote. For you guys, and I don't think we have, I'm skimming through the list. I'm not sure if we've got any retailers on the call. Just kind of like go into the chat box and tell me you're a retailer if you are. But I'm going to kind of skip the in-store traffic monitoring and go on to online and email marketing analytics. You need to be paying attention to what's happening when you promote so that you can decide if you're doing the right things or the wrong things. And then customer reward programs are going to start getting much more interesting as retailers and producers collaborate or as complementary businesses collaborate. And all the data from all these activities that you do will actually help you make better decisions. And there's all this cool software available now where you can connect it to your Google Analytics. I mean, a lot of people say, I can't read my Google Analytics. It makes me crazy. In fact, when we walk them through their Google Analytics, they're like, oh, that's easier than I thought. So you can do the Google Analytics. And there are lots of softwares that will pull all of your data in and give you cool charts and graphs and everything you need to make better decisions. So you need to learn to collect and use data. And then we need to incorporate some direct marketing disciplines. And I'm not going to get deep into this slide now. I'd like to talk about list building next week. You need more responsible solutions, a transparent supply chain, paying attention to things like circular economies. I love the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. They give us a fantastic guideline for telling the story of our transparency initiatives. So more responsible solutions are also critical. And leadership is going to be more important than ever. Leading ourselves, leading others, leading people in our network. The leadership isn't just within a company. You might think, I'm just one company. You need to provide leadership to your suppliers and to your downstream, your retailers and your consumers too. So a major criteria for choosing business partners should be, is this company well run? Is this company ethical? Are they agile and flexible? Are they open to change? Are they creative thinkers? If they don't qualify as a yes to all of those questions, they're not going to be a good business partner for you. They're not going to help you make money. So, kind of wrapping it all up, these are the 12 major themes that have come out of these 5 big disruptions and that we are all going to be paying attention to as we move into the future. So design and meaning in the products, and I equate design with meaning, and handmade and small batch coupled with artisanal and high craft. Manufacturing diversification is going to change the nature of competition. Micro-targeting, that's finding your people and using the internet to find your people and make a community out of them. More collaboration and transparency between retailers and producers, and direct connection with the consumers, even in conjunction with your retailers. People think it's like a headbutting, like I'm either going direct to consumers or I can work with my retailers, but I can't have both. But the smart people are going to do it together. Creating experiences out of the product. You need an online game. Everybody has to be able to perform online. We're going to see retail models continue to change, very alternative approaches to retail. And everyone's going to have to invest in their business now, small and large, which is going to affect investment in inventory, certainly for 2020. And then everyone needs a better business acumen. Those are the 12 takeaways from what I just shared with you, based on those 5 disruptions and the opportunities they present. Now, that was a mouthful or an earful, both. So now what I'd like to do is I'm going to jump back on the screen and answer your questions, and I'll hang out for as long as you want me to answer questions. Let's see if I could just get this back. Okay, I'm back. So, any questions? Did I give you a headache? Were there some thoughts there that you hadn't thought of before? Just waiting to see some questions pop through. Michael, you gave me a voice recording, but I'm not sure I can stop and listen to it right now. Yes, please ask questions in chat. Or Michael, tell me, is your question in the voicemail? In which case I'll click go. Explain more about the caveats. Okay. So Michael, you tell me if I should play your voice recording if it's your question, and then I'll answer Janice's question in the meantime. So the caveats are, we've seen this dynamic, it's not so dynamic, this rigid tension between retailers and studio and producers and designers, where the retailers were saying, if you sell online, I'm not going to carry you. And back in the 80s, they could still get away with that. And all the way through the 90s, they could get away with that. But now it's just too hard to make those hard and fast rules. But so the retailer is saying, hey, what's the point of me carrying your work if you're just going to sell the work in my area and take those sales from me? And the designer is saying, what's the point in me not selling online because the retailers aren't paying my bills? The caveat is that you can work together. So for instance, one of the models that works really well is that designers tell a retailer, so say the retailer is in, if they're in Wisconsin, you might give them a 20-mile radius. If they're in New York, you might give them a half-mile radius. So you give them a geographical territory and you tell them, if I'm going to sell online and I'm never going to put my prices below yours, and I'm only going to put on sale all the inventory I take back from you in inventory swaps. So I'm not going to put anything on sale that you've got in the store. So I'm going to protect you on price. And if I get a customer in your market based on this group of zip codes, I'm going to send those customers to you. But if for some reason they still want to deal with me directly, I will give you a cut of that sale. That way your retailer is protected, you are protected, then you can cover all those other zip codes you don't have a retailer in, and everyone's happy. Now retailers tend to object to it. But I've only seen one retailer put their foot down and drop designers over it. And she's not really around anymore. So it's a model that works really well. And the more transparent and honest you are with your retailer, the more likely they are to say, okay, let's give it a try. Because the retailers know you need to make a living. So that's what I'm talking about with this transparent, completely honest, practical conversations that people have to have with their retailers. And you can come up with all kinds of models like that. Whatever works for you and your retailers, to make sure that you can make a living and they aren't investing in your line and then losing some of that investment to direct sales that go to you. So Janice, did that answer your question? Okay, good. Just watching for more questions here. Oh, see, now I'm waiting for you to ask questions. I'm pouring some tea. Thank goodness it's still hot. All right, I see some of you are typing. Let's see. CRM. Okay, CRM is customer relationship management. And what it basically is software that captures a lot of customer data that you can then use to have more meaningful interactions with your customers. A good CRM system will also do marketing automation. So that's where you can create, say somebody signs up for your email list and they sign up on a page where you're showing some of your alternative bridal work and it's all custom. They're going to go into a list for people who want to hear about your custom bridal. If they sign up on a page that you're just sharing some of your fashion work and it's ready to sell, they're going to go in a list of people who are interested in buying fashion directly, not waiting for a custom piece. Now, is it possible that people are interested in both of those things? Sure, but you want to add them to the list and then start sending them the information that's most relevant to their dominant interest. A CRM system gives you all of those lists. It helps you collect the information, the email address from the various pages into the correct list. But it goes beyond that. It can tell you information about your customer activities over time. So for instance, if I go look up a customer in my CRM system, my CRM is attached to our social media channels and also to our website. I can see what social media activities our customers have been doing, which posts they respond to, what they shared. I can also, and I know it's kind of weird and Big Brother-ish, and so you got to kind of like grapple with that particular issue. But CRM helps you be omni-channel because it helps you see what's interesting to them on social media, what's interesting to them on the website, what's interesting to them in your emails. And it allows you to direct more of the relevant information to your customers and not bother them with the irrelevant information. And so you get more and more one-to-one in your communication by using these systems. And so that's like a broad description of what a CRM is. Some CRM systems would be HubSpot is a CRM, plus marketing automation. Green Rope is a much more affordable thing that does everything that HubSpot does, but not quite as prettily. Infusionsoft is a CRM. SharpSpring is a CRM. Now, MailChimp and Constant Contact have components of CRM, but they're not as fully fleshed as something like HubSpot. So those are all examples of CRM systems. Let's see. Name a good website designer. Okay, so here's the thing with website design. There are many good website designers. There are not that many companies that have a great website design philosophy. And that's really important because it's like if you went into a shoe store and somebody just tried to sell you the pair of shoes that they were interested in selling without finding out where you walk and how much you walk and what your job is like and how your feet are made. And, if somebody just kept trying to sell you the same pair of shoes that they sold the last 20 people without paying attention to your particular needs, that's how most website design firms work. And that's what bothers me about a lot of what's out there in the website design world. So the truth is, Shopify can be a great website for a particular application. WordPress is a great website. Joomla makes a great website. Drupal, Magento, even Wix and Weebly. I just recommended yesterday that somebody do something on Squarespace. Even though it's not a development tool that my company uses, it fit their need. So I tend to prefer to speak to design philosophy as opposed to tell you about a designer. Because if somebody says to you, all I do is WordPress and here's your WordPress, then that's like saying, I just have this one pair of shoes I want to sell. It's very important that you get your business needs assessed and get the right tool for you. And that may be that you want a tool that you can build out and manage yourself. It may be that you want a tool that somebody else can build out for you, but then you can manage it yourself. And it may be that you want something that you don't ever have to touch. Somebody else is going to manage it for you. It also could be that you want something that is truly e-commerce with a shopping cart, and you're just going to have dozens and hundreds of products on there, and that's the way it's going to work. That's a Shopify site. Or are you going to really have an information-rich site that's about your studio process and your design thought process, and everything is a unique one of a kind? Then Shopify isn't the best tool for you. So design philosophy wise, make sure that you're talking to somebody that can help you find your shoes, because after that, there are so many different great website systems, and you just need one that's right for you. What Janice, you asked, is that like crazy hard to learn? Do you mean the CRM? While I'm waiting for Janice to clarify that, Susan's asking what proportion of retailers still hang on to the old feelings of wanting exclusivity. Okay, 90% of them still hold on to that feeling, but 95% of those say, but I know it's practical. So if they have a good relationship with you, and if they're in it because you bring them differentiation, then they're going to work with you to figure out a model that works. Honestly, at this point, I'm in the place where if somebody doesn't pay you for your work and they don't want to work with you so you can make a living too, that's not a partner that you need. Let's see, information rich. Dana, I'm not sure I understand your question. Which one is for a networking group? Do you mean which type of website? For a networking group, for a website, I would go with something like Joomla, where you could add communication tools and social tools to it. So once you start getting into a group that needs to talk to each other and share information and maybe have some private spaces and some public spaces, you're up to something like a Joomla, Drupal, Magento. So at the very low end, lowest cost, you've got Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, Shopify is a little higher. WordPress is a little higher than Joomla. Drupal and Magento are up here, both in terms, now not necessarily in terms of cost to manage. They all actually have a very similar cost of ownership, but cost to implement. How do you spell it? Joomla, Joomla. And if you're MJSA members, actually, even if you're not, I wrote an article for MJSA for the buyer's guide for this year, and it might be publicly available on comparing the different types of website environments and why you might choose one over another. A list of good questions you need to ask yourself and what you need to ask the web designer. That's partly covered in that MJSA article. Okay, I'm going to make a note to share the MJSA article. If it's not public, if I'm wrong, then I need to just ask Rich Humans over at MJSA if I can share it already. I get my articles back after 90 days, but it's not 90 days old yet. So MJSA article on website types, I'm writing here. And also questions to ask designer. Also, you guys, I'm for those of you who already have a website, what we want to do in my Works Marketing group right now is create a series of tutorials to teach you how to manage your website. So for those of you who have been watching my Facebook videos on that I've been putting out since this coronavirus thing took off in the US, one of the things I told people early on is do not rush into a new website today. Now's not the time to make those decisions. But still, like all week, last week, and the week before, people were asking for us to quote them on a new website. And what we found was that 70% of them had a website that would meet their needs. It just needed updating or some tweaking. So that made me think we should put together some tutorials to teach people how to manage the website they've got. So I'd like to know which tutorials to do first. I don't know if we should do WordPress first or Joomla or Shopify. So on the works.world site, that's WERX.world, there's a tab for, I think it's called Help Us Help You. Anyway, there's only 4 pieces of navigation because that's sort of our site where all of our brands kind of combine. So the navigation is really small, but one of those 4 tabs is a survey asking what you need. And once we know what you need, we'll create the tutorials according to the greatest need. Let's see. Recommendations for how emerging designers could establish new relationships with retailers in this current moment. I'd imagine that we might need to wait a few months. That's such a good question, Sarah. I guess, my first recommendation is to just be having open conversations. Now, in the last 2 weeks, I fielded a lot of questions about, I don't have enough money to pay my vendor if I don't have money coming in. A lot of retailers have been literally living from, get the inventory and try to sell it in order to have time to pay it. People are living very cash tight. And I've been telling people, just have open conversations with your supply chain. Tell them the truth. Talk to them about what their reality is right now. Everybody's in pain. So all we're trying to do is kind of like diffuse it a bit. And the way you diffuse pain in a large group of people is to have open, honest conversations, a lot of empathy, and listen for what their experience feels like, and figure out where you can fit your experience to their experience, and everybody does a little better. For right now, those conversations are the most important thing you can do. I have to think about the rest of your question, Sarah, because there's a lot there. It's not a simple answer. So start with open conversations. Let me review this and think. Janice says it's really overwhelming to try to keep up on CRM and other platforms. Is it very hard to learn, and where's the best place to learn these things? Okay, there is a learning curve to CRM. There's no doubt. But I always, every once in a while, I'm like, I have to learn this new thing. Like when I started running this company in Italy 18 months ago, suddenly I had to learn Italian, and I'd never had a need to learn Italian before. And my mind practically locked up at the idea that I had to add another language. And then, because I already speak Spanish, everything I studied in Italian turned to Spanish, which was not helpful. And whenever I'm struggling with something new that I have to learn, I remember something my daughter said to me when she was studying for her nursing degree. She was sitting at the kitchen table. This is quite a while ago now because she's 35. She was sitting at the kitchen table and she looked up from her work and she said, "Mom, you want to know the difference between my career and your career?" I said, "Yeah, I do." She said, "Well, if you make a mistake, nobody dies." And ever since then, I have been really conscious of the fact that I can learn anything I need to learn as it relates to business. My advice for learning CRM is to learn it one bite at a time. Do not try to learn the whole system. So say you get something like Green Rope, which is the most affordable CRM for small businesses. Or if you're not doing very much with email and lists yet, then you can start with something like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact. The first thing you want to do is pick one tutorial out of their system. Maybe it's on developing lists. Maybe it's on creating an automation, and you study that one thing and you do it, and you'll find that one thing is easy to absorb. You might read it a couple of times, but you'll get it. And then once you've got that one thing down, then learn the next thing. These systems are very complex, but you don't have to learn them all at once. And as soon as you give yourself permission to learn one thing at a time, you're going to be way further down the road 8 months from now than if you kept putting it off because it felt overwhelming. So that's my advice for learning CRMs, because you're not wrong. They are complex, but you can learn them if you break them into bite-sized pieces. Is Klaviyo considered a CRM? Yeah, it is, Susan. I'm not as familiar with it. We support clients in a lot of different CRMs, but we haven't done anything with Klaviyo yet. And I'll be happy to take a look at it later and tell you what I think, but I don't have much familiarity with it right now. Other questions? Do I recommend small designers doing consignment with retailers? I do not. I am absolutely not a fan of consignment. And I think it damages the small designer's business, and it eats up the money that you have to put into work. And designers have been pushing back on me about this for 25 years now. But if I don't do consignment, then who will I sell my work to? And I say, if you do consignment, you're not selling your work. You are giving it away in the hopes that they will pay you for it. So no, I'm not a fan of consignment. There are a very, very few retailers in this country who do consignment only and really good about it. And I think two. Everybody else takes consignment work. They forget. I'm in retail stores all the time. It's behind the counter. It's in the safe. It's collecting dust. Nobody's promoting it because it's not the thing that has a spiff on it right now. It just doesn't get the attention. So I tell retailers, you need to invest in inventory because being a merchant is your business model. And I tell designers, don't let them have your inventory for free. You are not a bank. Now, Michael, if you're saying who can afford consignment these days, I agree. Nobody can afford consignment because it's not like the metal's free. Retailers are having a hard time affording inventory, and it's because they're over inventoried and they do not have a lot of cash. So it is a challenge. That's why I'm telling everybody, you've got to get good at these online skills, because if you're just waiting for retail to pay your bills, you could wait a while. There are some great retailers out there, but there aren't enough of them to support all of the designers. And yet the consumers want what you guys have to offer. And there are also, I have to say, some great retailers out there that are just like turning themselves inside out to promote designer work. So I don't want you to think I'm making a blanket statement about retailers and designers, because for every retailer who just doesn't get it about designers, there's another retail. They might be some tiny little shop and they're doing this amazing job with 3 different designers in their regional market, and they do great work. So you have to get really creative and go find those retailers you can partner with. Best way to get people to your website. Now that is a whole webinar. That's a whole day or more. Okay, so the first thing that I want all of you to think about is that the internet is based on numbers, then words, and then images. Okay, so all those ones and zeros that we use for our code, they're producing words. Search engines use words to find everything. Consumers love visuals, but when they search, they don't say, I want a round object with an oval on top that has green, purple, and pink in it. They say, show me a picture of, I don't know, a ring. They say, I'm searching for a ring with a sapphire. I'm searching for a diamond ring with trillions on the side. So they don't search by describing shapes and colors. They search with words. Words are the currency of the internet. And that means you need a lot of words in your website. That means you have to have great titles for things, great descriptions for things, usually a long description and a short description. Then you need to put something in the meta tags and in the search terms. And that means every picture you put has to either have a meaningful name for the photograph. It cannot be IMG 9028673.jpg. Nobody's ever going to search for that. So your pictures have to have real names, and or they should have what's called alt text describing what the picture is. Because when people go to search engines looking for something, they use words, and the words bring them to your website if your website has those words in it. This is also why blogging is so important. Everybody's like, I'm not a blogger. I hate to write. I don't know what to write. But the problem is that if you don't put new words on your website all the time, nobody finds your website. If you don't put something new on your website all the time, the search engines won't even send people to you. If the last new thing you put on your website was 8 months ago, as far as Google's concerned, you're dead. You disappeared. You don't even have a business anymore. And Google is 86% of search. So that's really important that you keep Google happy. So all I'm talking about here is organic search, the words behind your website. And if you wrote a post every single day about something that was relevant to your brand, to your relationship with your customers, to what customers find interesting about you, even if it was just 2 paragraphs, if you did a journal of your world as a designer or studio producer, every day there'd be new words out there, and those words would bring people to your site. So organic SEO is the most powerful thing you can do to bring people to your website. But it doesn't add up overnight. It takes time. But kind of like learning CRM one bite at a time, 8 months from now, you're going to have thousands more words than you had today. And those words will bring you customers. So before you focus on paying for social media boosts and pay-per-click advertising and all of the things that you could spend a whole bunch of money on, get really good at putting words on your website and having a website that facilitates putting those words on. And that's the most important. Yeah, the blog needs to be in your website. If the blog's on a separate domain, it's not helping you. Does that apply to an Etsy product too? Okay, so Etsy has its own algorithms for search, and the main beneficiary of Etsy's algorithm is Etsy. And then if you've been on Etsy for a while, you've noticed they just throw it all up in the air every once in a while and see where the parts fall. And again, Etsy benefits and the sellers don't. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't sell on Etsy. I know lots of people who've made a great living selling on Etsy. I'm saying don't entrust your entire financial livelihood to Etsy. So you should have your own website on your own domain name with all your own words and your pictures that have words describing them. And then when people are buying your products on Etsy, when you ship to them, you also ship the little, what we call the, it's an old direct marketing term, and now I'm going to blank on it, but basically the be-back collateral that goes in the box that reminds them to come to your website where you can keep that customer, because customers constantly have the problem of going back to Etsy and they can't find that artist they like so much because Etsy keeps changing things. So yeah, you need your own website with Etsy, and you need to cultivate your customer base. So whenever Etsy decides to switch things up in its search algorithm or its promotional approach, you don't suffer. Do images and words in blog work better than just text? Well, it's funny because the image is like one of the things that helps with your search engine rankings. So somebody searches for, I don't know, a carving of a swan pendant. So swan carving pendant, like how many of those are out there? Probably more than you think, but they're not to be found everywhere. So somebody clicks on your link for swan carving pendant. If they go to your page and there's text, but there's not great images, ideally one image of the pendant close up and one of it on person, there's a really good chance they'll bounce back out and go to another link of a swan carving pendant. And the problem with that is Google says, ooh, they only stayed around on that page for 2 seconds. Not a good link. The next time somebody searches for swan carving pendant, yours is not on top. It's pushed way down the page. So images are what get people to stick on the page when they've done the search. So we like to fill websites up with relevant images because it causes that person to stick around long enough to maybe absorb some words. Words bring them to the site, images keep them there. No, I would have, Kathleen, I would have your own separate website. I wouldn't just do an Etsy website. Again, that's leaving way too much power with Etsy. I've just had too many customers. Like I have one customer who was doing, she was doing $160,000 a year on Etsy in 2005. That's not a bad turnover. And no, sorry, 2011. And then in 2012, they changed their algorithm and her income went right in the toilet. And then I've seen that pattern repeated over and over again. So you need to make sure you build your own website as well, and that you keep in control of your business's future. Other questions? Okay, so is there, like, I know I gave you big picture jewelry industry stuff today. Was there anything else you were hoping that I would address when I was talking about the state of the industry? I'm also willing to field any other questions you've got. But I do want to get a sense of whether or not today was useful for you to get that information and what I could have done better. And then I will review these comments for next week's session to make sure that I'm including detail. So going back to transparency, do we as small designers have to list all our components and where they are from? You don't have to, but it's incredibly useful if you do. I view transparency as a journey. Okay, it's the jewelry industry has been opaque forever. Now we're trying to be more transparent. People are sitting on safes full of gemstones that they may not know where they came from. They might have a drawer full of findings. In fact, I'm forever finding drawers full of findings when I go to client places. And they're all mixed together and people don't know where things came from. So what I recommend is that you start. Start by having some things that you can really tell your customers, look, I know where this came from and who made it, and that it was in compliance with what we would consider, responsible production and responsible mining if it's a metal or a gem. Start adding more and more transparency to your work with a goal of being fully transparent. The internet has made it possible and even probable that everything will be transparent. That's a good thing. That's good for humanity. So just start down that path. And eventually, again, it's like learning CRM or starting to write blog posts. 8 months from now, you'll be more transparent than you are today. And maybe 3 years from now, you're fully transparent. And that will be good because consumers are going to demand more and more of an easy YouTube video that could explain Google Analytics. Looking at it gives me nightmares. I don't know. Let me see if there's one that I like to recommend. I'm sure there is because there's a YouTube video on everything. Easy Google Analytics training. Okay, I made a note. Other questions? I see some more typing, so I'm hanging in here. Oh, good. I'm glad it's been helpful. If you guys have criticisms, I'm more than happy to hear them. Okay, good. More questions next week. How to start an email list. I'm going to talk a little bit more about list work next week, but the first thing that you should think about in starting an email list is, what are the segments of my customers? Like, how would I segment my customers? Because we tend to think of our customers, and we always talk about targeting our customers, right? So here's your target, and we always aim at the center of that target. And the center of that target is your core customers, the customers who really get who you are and what you do that makes you different and why you matter to them. And so you should have, one of your lists should be that core group. Like, who do I put in that core group? But then there are all those other circles on a target, and they are very important. So one of those targets might be, like, say you tend to sell to women in their upper 40s through early 60s who are affluent. Well, out here, you might have young women that are new professionals that don't have that kind of expendable income yet, but they're a good aspirational group. That's a list. Or you may have bottom feeders. I love bottom feeders. Everybody says, oh, designers should never be on sale. And I've had this argument forever. If you don't go on sale, how do you get rid of the crap that never is sold? Every business has to go on sale once in a while. It shouldn't be all the time. It shouldn't be predictable. It shouldn't be on your new stuff. It should be stuff that you've decided, time to move this stuff out and make room for new. So when you're condoing your inventory, that's the sale stuff. Well, that's one of your outer rings. Those are your bottom feeders, the people who are never going to buy you at full price, but will snap up everything you've got on sale. You may also want to segment your list a different way. You may want to say, well, I do a lot of custom personal consultation work, and that's the list of people that I make things for. And then I have a fashion line, and it's less expensive, and I just sell it as I make it. That's a list. So you have to really think about how you want to slice and dice your business. Don't start with 20 lists. 5 lists max to begin when you think about your segments. And you may only have 2 to start. If you're just starting out, you may just have 1, but then be paying attention to how those customers might be slightly different from each other, either in where they are on your target, or the products that they respond to, or the services in your offering. And then you'll start peeling off and creating lists. Lists allow you to get more one-to-one with people. So this is some of the primary stuff you want to pay attention to. Oh, Judith, I'm sorry you couldn't see the slides. I will send the slides out along with the link to this replay in an email. And usually it takes about a day for the video to process, so it'll be tomorrow. Okay, going back to images. So if the image, in most website environments, there's something called alt text. I know for sure it's called alt text in Shopify, but I'd have to pull up all my backends right now to tell you what it's called and everything else. It's alt text in Joomla. It's alt text in WordPress as well, but it's a box where you can put a description of the picture. As long as you have that description box available, to describe what's in your picture, that's sufficient. Now, some of the website builder environments don't give you an alt text box. It's one of the reasons why I'm not fond of the really low end ones. You can compensate for that by naming the picture something meaningful, and then they can search on the file name. But I prefer to really have an alt text box because the search engine searched a little bit more easily. Cool. Okay. Well, wow, our time just flew by. We are at 4:25 Eastern. I imagine you guys are, yep, Shopify has alt text boxes. I imagine you guys are getting fried by now. I really thank you for hanging out this long. Like I said, I will give you the replay and the slides in an email that'll probably be tomorrow morning once the video's had a chance to produce and we can get a link for it. And again, I'd like to thank JDPN and FIT for asking for this little mini series to be put together and then for making it available to everyone else. If you are a designer and you're not a member of JDPN, then please take a look at their website. It's jdpn.org and see if that's something that you can participate in because they're a great group. And what are appropriate titles for product other than image? Moon over Miami is great. Anything, think about what somebody would search for when searching for that product. So if somebody wants such and such, that might be a good name for your product. It's the thing that describes the product. All right, then I will see you guys hopefully next week. And again, thank you very much. I really enjoyed putting this together for you and answering all your questions. And I guess that's it for today. So I will see you next week.